Hi, I'm Alana. I use they and she pronouns.
And I'm Jessie. I use she and her pronouns.
And
we're making mentions.
Today, we're going to be talking all about Yom Kippur. So this is the first in our mini Jewish holiday rundown series where every month for the next year or so, we're going to take a Jewish holiday that falls during that month and break it down and talk all about it. So yeah, Jessie, what is Yom Kippur?
Yom Kippur is one of the 2 high holy days. It happens after Rosh Hashanah, 10 days, and those days in between are known as the days of awe. On Rosh Hashanah, it's said in Jewish tradition, God writes our names down in the book of life. And on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. So during those days in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we can actively engage in the process of teshuvah, or making things right, repairing with people we have harmed and with God. And by Yom Kippur, God will make the final decision about basically whether we will live or die for the next year.
Super chill holiday.
Super
no
laid back.
pressure.
Yes.
Very relaxed.
When do we celebrate Yom Kippur, Alana?
Yom Kippur is usually celebrated on or around the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. This is typically the end of September or the beginning of October on the Gregorian calendar, if you subscribe to that sort of thing. And this means that it falls around the beginning of Libra season if you follow tropical astrology, which we were just talking about being cool and fitting. Libra season is all about balance and the weighing of the scales and fairness and justice. It's also, and I feel like this is something I've only recently started to get into about Libra season, all about love, because Libra is very Venusian. And so I think it really speaks to the qualities of Yom Kippur. We're talking about what it means to be in relationship with each other in loving ways. And that happens through like justice and repairing harms. Kind of tea that it happens on Libra season. Who knows if ancient folks did that intentionally, but it works out really well. That is when we celebrate Yom Kippur.
What is the history of Yom Kippur, or when do we celebrate it in the Torah?
Great question, Jessie. So glad that you asked. Truly, with so many of these holidays, though, like I don't actually know when they show up in the Torah. So I'm always like, okay, I know that it's the Day of Atonement, but like, why? Basically, in the Torah, Yom Kippur takes place after the ancient Israelites are leaving Egypt and arriving at Mount Sinai. So God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. However, because Moses is up on the mountain for so long, people start to panic and lose their faith. And this is when they build the golden calf that they begin to worship, because they're like, oh my God, we need to turn away from Judaism. We need to go back to worshiping idols. This is also where Rosh Chodesh comes from. You have to work a ton, which we'll talk about later. So obviously when Moses finally comes down from the mountain, he's like, what the hell, guys? Like, sorry it took so long. Like, I was just getting the 10 commandments from God. Like, no big deal. And they atone for worshiping this golden calf. God forgives their sins and then offers Moses a second set of the tablets. Goes back up again. And this offering of the second set of the tablets is why we observe Yom Kippur, because Jews atoned for their sin of worshiping the idol, worshiping the golden calf, and God forgives.
That's really cool.
I didn't know that until very recently.
I didn't know that at all. And I love that, because I've always wondered why we use the word atone specifically. Like, why not make things right or repair? But atoning implies like doing more things than just making it right. It's like fixing and repairing and going back to the thing you did. It's not just covering up. It's a whole process. And that makes sense then for that story. The Jews paid dearly for that choice to worship the golden calf. I love that.
What are some of the general Ashkenazi traditions for Yom Kippur?
Yeah, so some general traditions around Yom Kippur. One is wearing white, and wearing a long white garment that covers all of your clothes,
Kittel.
standing a lot, not wearing leather shoes, which is a tradition of a lot of special days during the Jewish year. We fast traditionally, and we do not bathe, we don't have sex, we don't eat, we don't engage in joyous activities, quote unquote, and no anointing.
You're not supposed to anoint yourself with perfume or good smelling lotions. Just another way of being pure and untouched. You're also not supposed to bathe or wash yourself unless you are washing dirt off of yourself with cold water. Like there's no like enjoyment.
No pleasure
that's
to be
supposed to
had.
happen.
Okay, gotcha.
Because it's all about this self-affliction in the name of repentance and showing up for God or showing God like how significant this is to you. Also very chill.
And emphasizing that this is, again, Ashkenazi European tradition, so that there are many different ways to honor and celebrate Yom Kippur.
Yes, Jessie and I are always talking from an Ashkenazi lens unless we're talking to another wonderful Jewish person who has experience with a different tradition, just because we're both Ashkenazi Jews. So that's the experience we speak from. So that's a rundown on generally what Yom Kippur is, and we really wanted to dig into Yom Kippur this year because there's so much ritual and intentional prayer and practice that goes along with Yom Kippur. Literally just so much to talk about. I feel like I've learned a lot about Yom Kippur in the past year, things that I didn't really understand about it before. So I'm excited for us to get into it a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like it's very in the spirit of why we started making mentions, because I didn't learn anything cool about Yom Kippur. We were just reflecting that the first time we talked about anything making mentions in a video was about the book of Jonah, which we famously read on Yom Kippur. But that was my only connection to it as a kid, I think, was just like the Jonah story is cool. And I think there's like this weird keeping of Yom Kippur from children, because we're like, it's so serious. Kids like have to be quiet during the service or they wouldn't get it. And so maybe we can talk more about how that's one interpretation of Yom Kippur, but it's weird the way we keep it from kids.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'm jumping ahead in our conversation a little, but I think that you talking about how we keep it from kids because it's supposed to be this solemn occasion is something that has been challenged, at least for me this year. In our conversation with Rebecca Arab, we talked a bit about Yom Kippur, and something that Rebecca told us that we looked into afterwards is the idea that according to the Talmud, Yom Kippur is supposed to be the second most joyous holiday after Tu B'Av, which is like all about love and like being in a relationship with each other and intimacy and like all of those good, beautiful things. And so the idea that the second most joyous holiday would be Yom Kippur is something that I feel like historically I've been like, this is a very solemn and serious day is like unbelievable to me. And I think there's so many things about it that make it feel like that. I think we've made the idea of repentance and like atoning for our sins the focus, and we've taken the love out of that, because I think that comes from such a place of love. Like when I was looking into why is Yom Kippur a joyous holiday, a lot of sources were like, this is a joyous holiday because it's all about repairing harm and being forgiven. And that's like a joyous thing, and that's so true. Like it can be hard, but it is so beautiful and moving to repair harm or forgive or be forgiven. Sources also talk about the day being a day of joy for God because God gave Yom Kippur to the Jewish people with this love and joy and was excited to give this to the Jewish people. So I really like the idea of starting to associate Yom Kippur with love and joy, because like whenever I'm thinking about restorative justice, which really feels like the theme of Yom Kippur, like it's coming from a place of love. So yeah, I love that outlook. And I think maybe if we included children in Yom Kippur services, it could be more joyous. And we could also take away the stigma of it being this scary and intense holiday.
I agree 100%. I think because it's actually something that Rabbi Alan Liu talks about in his book, this is real and you're completely unprepared, that the older we get, the more afraid of death we get, which I find fascinating because 7-year-olds are also obsessed with death, but because they realize people die someday. And a lot of kids have experiences around death before even that age, whether it's grandparents or loved ones, or unfortunately sometimes close family members, friends. I think we think kids don't go through shit, and it's not true. Kids go through shit all the time. And so if we are trying to process feelings about death and that we're going to die someday, so are kids. And it's okay to include them in that reflection. It doesn't have to be this, like you're saying, like sad, heavy thing all the time. It's just they're thinking about it too. So
we're also doing young people a disservice when we like keep them out of those conversations, because this is why it takes so long for people to understand, but apologize and repair and like experience that it's okay to make mistakes and that we can move on from those things and what it means to let go, because we're scared to talk to children about it because we think they won't be able to understand it. But really, children are still dealing with these things. Instead, we're just not giving them the same tools that we're allowing ourselves to engage with them. I think that is such a good point. I also just think it would be helpful for a lot of adults to understand it if it was communicated in a way that made it accessible for young children as well.
Yes, because a big part of what Alan Liu talks about in this book is Yom Kippur being a dress rehearsal for our death, or we're practicing death in certain ways, because what we're doing is we're releasing parts of ourselves or things, or we're supposed to release parts of ourselves and things that no longer align with who we are. And that is a little death. We have to let go of things that we thought were important to us, or as we'll talk about with Kol Nidre, commitments we've made or things that we thought were going to serve us and no longer do. And that's all what growing up is. Every time you reach a new stage, you're like, I'm no longer a little kid. My parents don't pick me up anymore. No one reads me books at night. Oh, it's all little deaths. Like, we're all releasing these little moments as we get older. Anyway, it just made me think of that. But yes, Rabbi Liu has 2 chapters that are great on this. I just want to caveat, I've been hyping this book up a lot. And in the Yom Kippur chapter, Rabbi Liu does mention that he has an affinity for Rudy Giuliani and Shlomo Carlebach. But I will say that Rabbi Alan Liu passed in 2006. So while he could have known a lot about how terrible both of these men were, I will situate him in history that he didn't see the full escalation of the Rudy Giuliani disaster. But I just don't want to be falsely claiming that this book is perfect. There are a lot of issues with it.
And in the spirit of Yom Kippur, really,
yes, truly, we are.
Let us talk about it anyway.
Yeah. The last thing I just want to say before we move on to the next part of this is one big part of this book that I think is important about Yom Kippur, and we can talk about it again before the end, is that we do this in community and that we are not alone when we go through this. We should be together with other Jews or with people we love and care about, because we are all processing life and death, and it should be done in spiritual community. That's not to say that if you have trauma around your spiritual and religious community, absolutely observe in a way that is meaningful to you. But the idea that we should not go through life alone and should not process feelings about death alone and feelings about the end and teshuva and repair alone is very like anti-capitalist, anti-do-it-yourself-ism that most of our lives are. So I think it's really important for us to note that this is a great way to practice communal healing and working on moving towards new structures that aren't based on succeeding by yourself and individualism.
Yeah. For folks who haven't read the book, could you expand a little more on what it means for Yom Kippur to be a dress rehearsal for death, like this concept that Rabbi Liu is talking?
Yeah. So the book itself is, as I said, the days of awe as a journey of transformation. Each chapter is about one of the days of awe. There's a Rosh Hashanah chapter. There's also an Elul chapter. There's Kol Nidre, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. It goes through all of the days in a very highly dramatic fashion, because Rabbi Liu's whole philosophy is that You don't have to look outside of Judaism for the drama and the intensity and the passion and the curiosity and all the things that we're looking for, because it's all there in one form or another. And so whether it's going back to ancient traditions or wrestling with this concept of communal worship and what does it mean to be in community with all of the tensions that brings, it's all here for us in Judaism. In the cycle of transformation that we go through every year, Rosh Hashanah and even Slichot leading up to Rosh Hashanah is a call, an awakening, a waking up and processing that like we are alive. We are here on this planet. We should celebrate and be full of life. And then the 10 days of Teshuvah are about repairing these relationships. But by the arrival of Yom Kippur, we are wrestling with our death and we are reckoning with our death. So it is in a cycle of transformation. It's not to say that Yom Kippur is the only time we think about death in Judaism, because we think about it a lot. But in this book, that's where it shows up in our cycle.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks to Rabbi Lou for that. I feel like that concept really stuck with me this year. I feel like after we talked about that all like back in Elul, I was like, wow, that's really powerful. And I do think that framing of Yom Kippur is really compelling and makes me feel more invested in it. Like this idea that we are preparing for our death, or what would we do if we were dying? Who would we forgive? Where would we ask to be forgiven? What would we want to leave our mark in the world as? Like, how would we want to leave the world? And I think that's a really powerful concept, because I think it can feel so easy living under capitalism to just go through the motions and just go through our days just being like, okay, I have to do this just to make ends meet. And that's very real. But I think sometimes the reminder that we are mortal and death awaits all of us is a wake-up call for people. I think every time I'm forced to reckon with that and step back and remember that I only have, as Mary Oliver would say, this one precious life.
Yeah.
I'm always like, okay, am I doing the things that I want to do in my life? Am I like living the way that I want to live in this like really very short period of time that I get to have alive here on earth? I don't know. It's very existential, but I think that's what I would want, but that's what I want to spend Yom Kippur thinking about and reflecting on every year. And I think that is the intention, is to be like, another year has passed. Let's pause. Like, what can I do to live life to the fullest, to live as my fullest self? Maybe try again this coming year and check in again next year.
Yeah, and I love that. Just quickly, like I love that Judaism anticipates we're gonna need that reminder every year. They're not like every 10 years, every time we get married. Like no, it's every single year we're gonna lose touch with ourselves, and every single year you have a chance to come back to yourself. And I just love that cycle, and that it anticipated the need for it.
So, and also even beyond a yearly reminder is this idea of Yom Kippur Katan that Rebecca Erev brought up in our last session. Truly, shout out to Rebecca Erev. If you did not listen to our episode with them, you really should. They just had so much wisdom. Clearly, we're really pulling so much from it. But Yom Kippur Katan is this idea of like a little Yom Kippur, or like a minor, small Yom Kippur, and a practice that is observed by some Jews on the day before every Rosh Chodesh. So like the day before the beginning of every new month. And it also consists of fasting in a less rigorous way. Like the ritual is a little bit less rigorous than on Yom Kippur. But I think it points to this idea, again, that any time we're starting a new cycle should be a time for us to take stock, reflect, and reset. We have the opportunity to do that every day. You could technically do that every single morning. You could do that at the beginning of every week. And I think it's just giving us another opportunity throughout the year to have that reset and recentering in the self. And like, where do I need to make amends? Where do I need to let go? And how can I enter this new month again with my fullest self at the forefront? Love the concept of that. You don't have to wait a whole year to work on repair and forgiveness and love. And I think that's important, because what comes up a lot is a lot of Jews, especially Reform Jews, will be like high holiday Jews.
Oh, yes.
Who like which is fine if that's when you're
Totally.
showing up. Historically, that was my thing as well. But will only go to synagogue or will only engage with their Judaism on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the holiest days of the year. Like Yom Kippur being the biggest one. Like, okay, if I'm going to show up, I got to show up on the most important day of the year.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of drawbacks to that idea, of course, but I think that there are so many opportunities for us within Judaism to show up outside of just Yom Kippur.
There are lower stakes ways
So many lower stakes ways.
communicate whatever you're trying to communicate with your community or with your spiritual being, or you don't have to wait until this day of high drama and intensity. Like,
and of course, you don't want to go back to temple because you're associating Judaism with Yom Kippur, which like
the longest services.
We're obviously reflecting on the ways that it can be like molded to be more joyous, but in general, it's like very intense to be in a synagogue on Yom Kippur, and like that can be great, but it's like also okay, like it's bringing a lot to the table. So one of the biggest rituals during Yom Kippur is this idea of a day of fast. And fasting shows up a lot within Judaism, but I think because like we were just talking about, Yom Kippur is the time that most Jews come back to observe. More on that later. I think it's the time that the most people are engaging in fasting. And there's a lot of things to be said about the idea of fasting and how that intersects with diet culture and body image and fat phobia. Two things that I will say before we get into that is the reason that we fast is to be spiritually as close to God as we can be. The idea is that on Yom Kippur, we are basically supposed to be as though we are angels. And so angels would not need to eat, wear white, or barefoot. We're supposed to be acting as if we are angels because it's our dress rehearsal for that. Yeah.
I love that. That is so cool.
But that's one interpretation.
I love that.
And I think at its core, there's some value to that. If that is what's making you feel really close to God, if eating as a distraction that is helpful for you to put aside to only focus on prayer and repentance, go off. That makes a lot of sense. And it also says in the text that people who are unable to fast should not fast. So it's not like if you're 90 years old, you should fast all day. No. It does not say that. It says, if you can fast, you should fast. If you cannot, for any medical reasons, that's okay. You're not going to be like a sinner because you didn't fast. However, what if you don't have a medical reason not to fast, but you just don't want to fast?
Then I say, fuck the fast. I think also as somebody...
Title of this episode is fuck the fast.
That's all people are going to take away from this. I think as someone who works with young people and is around young people a lot, young people take things literally and take it very seriously when they see adults doing it. I can remember seeing the adults in my life as a young child really struggling with fasting and it affecting their mood and affecting how they treated their children. It's not worth it if that's what you're doing. Do you feel closer to God when you're like so angry that you didn't eat breakfast? Probably not a meaningful fast. And there's so many ways to fast. There's so many things we can refrain from to get our focus more on our choices, our intentionality, what we're bringing with us in a year. If you believe in God, your relationship with God, your spirituality, any of it. But to narrowly interpret fasting as just a day to deprive yourself of nutrients, that's not my Judaism, and that would never be a Judaism I would subscribe to. So if you at all struggle with any sort of messaging around food, body image, do not let anybody tell you that not fasting on Yom Kippur makes you any less Jewish. Everybody is Jewish on Yom Kippur for being Jewish. That's it. And I think the last thing I want to say about fasting and diet culture is if it is meaningful to you to fast, be mindful of those who you are around during your fast. And if you are someone who likes to share a lot about how you're feeling during your fast, consider not doing that because we often are not mindful of the remarks we make around food and around body image, but especially on Yom Kippur when people are making intentional choices around body image and food, be thoughtful about your own, and your fast should just be about you, not you telling it to other people.
Yeah, 100%. I think if it feels good for you, then exactly. It should be about you, and that's awesome. But I think that there are so many ways that gets complex and complicated, especially like when someone doesn't have a visible reason to not be eating or like a visible illness.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't be questioning anyone on why they're not fasting. And just talking about eating and eating habits in general can be super triggering for people with body issues, people who have experienced fat phobia, and people who are struggling with eating disorders, whether they're currently struggling or previously have struggled. There's just so much about food that can get complicated, and it's like, we can keep it to ourselves. One of the last things we wanted to talk about that we've been thinking about this Yom Kippur high holiday season is the Unetanneh Tokef and Kol Nidre. Also very chill, low stakes, very relaxed prayer.
Not a lot going on. You'll probably get bored. Just kidding. It's the highest intensity days.
The Unetanneh Tokef is this piece of liturgy that is chanted when the Ark is opened during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and all of the congregants who can stand, in body and spirit, are standing. And it's this very central poem during the high holy days. It's the one that basically is like, who by fire, who by water, who by
strangulation, who by wild beasts. Sorry, I'm just throwing my favorites in there.
It's so intense.
It's so intense. But it has a sick tune in the beginning. I don't know, the one that we knew growing up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was so good.
It's a good bet.
It's basically all saying on Rosh Hashanah, it is written, on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. So on Rosh Hashanah, this is what's going to happen, and on Yom Kippur, it's boom. It's closed, it's sealed. It's obviously not as simple as that. It's not that God is just telling us, predicting on Rosh Hashanah who is going to die and who is going to live in the coming year. However, this really points to the significance of these days, that we're supposed to be thinking about our death, and if we were being written into the book of life this year, how would we be living? We were curious where the Unetanneh Tokef came from. I just feel like I've been hearing a lot about it this year in a way that maybe I just haven't been cognizant of in years before.
Yeah.
And so we did a little bit of researching around, just a little bit, to try to get more clear on that. And so basically it's unclear, which is fun in its own way. There is a story that is related to it that I think is fun and Jewish. So it's as if this story is recorded in this 13th century commentary called Or Zarua that was written by this very prominent rabbi in the Middle Ages, Rabbi Riaz. That's his fun name.
Fun name.
And it's this halachic guide. And the story that is recorded in that guide says that the Unetanneh Tokef was composed by this 11th century sage named Rabbi Amnon of Mainz, who we actually never hear about in history besides this one story. That's why everyone's sort of like, that's not real, because we never talk about him again.
Sad.
And he's friends with this Archbishop of Mainz and is pressured to convert to Christianity by this Archbishop.
Bad.
So trying to delay, super bad friend. As we try to convert all our friends to Judaism.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in trying to delay, he requests 3 days to consider this offer. Immediately after, he regrets this a lot. He's like, I can't believe I would even give someone the thought that I would consider accepting a religion that's not Judaism. And so he spends these 3 days in prayer. He refuses to come to the archbishop like he promised, and is eventually forcibly brought to the archbishop's palace. He begs that his tongue be cut out to atone for this sin, which, talk about self-flagellation. And instead, the archbishop orders that his hand, I should have said like a content warning, but content warning, limb removal. The archbishop orders that his hands and legs be amputated limb by limb as punishment for not obeying his word to return after 3 days and for refusing to convert. And at each limb amputation, Rabbi Amnon is given the opportunity to convert, and he keeps refusing. And what's left of him is eventually sent home on a knight's shield, it says. They say this event occurred right before Rosh Hashanah, and so as he lay dying on Rosh Hashanah around Yom Kippur, he asks to be carried into the synagogue where he recites the original composition of the Unetanneh Tokef with his last breath, and later appears in a dream to Rabbi Kolonimus, who was an actual famous rabbi who's talked about a lot, apparently, and begs him to transcribe the prayer and include it in the text of the High Holy Day services. And thus it becomes part of the standard liturgy that we read on the high holidays. This is very much speculation and legend, but it is fun.
Yeah, we love speculation and legend.
I love to speculate. I love to speculate.
Yeah, and I love stories that also talk about the power of dreams and the power of remembering what other people have gone through, remembering their legacy. Regardless of whether or not it really happened, the forced conversions and the experience of specifically Ashkenazic Jews and Jews of Europe to convert to Christianity is real. And that is well documented. And so the idea that this could have originated during this time, I think is totally believable. And I'm fine with believing that.
Why not?
Somebody come attack me for that. I would love to chat about it. But I don't know. I'm fine with believing it because so much of Jewish tradition is obscure in where it comes from. And I think a story that I'm a big believer that we have to be accepting of and accountable to all of our history, the part that is noble and about martyrdom for Judaism, and the part that's about people who are like, yeah, I'll absolutely convert and I'm fine with it and I'll never think about Judaism again and live full and happy lives. That's part of our history too. So I say we own it. And that makes me think about Kol Nidre in a lot of ways too, because Kol Nidre is the prayer, but also the service that happens the night before Yom Kippur, our era of Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur starts. And it's considered a very holy service. Some people say the holiest night of the year. That prayer itself has a very, some people say, haunting melody, and it is beautiful. I just want to say my only experience with it is the Ashkenazic tradition. There is like a rich Ashkenazic tradition of passing down the melody through the generations, which I don't want to erase at all, but I'm just saying it is one melody for this prayer, which we consciously know, but I think in my head I just associate it with that music, and there's a lot of different melodies for it. But I think there's this interesting concept around Kol Nidre is that night we are allowed to pray with those who have transgressed, quote unquote, or those who have sinned. And it's such an interesting concept because are we not always? And the answer is kind of no, we're not supposed to, but which is wild. But Rabbi Alan Liu points out that we are all those who have transgressed. Like we're not separate from. So allowing us to pray with those who have transgressed is like, we all have in some way. We all might not have given up Judaism or done other things, but we are all transgressors in one way or another. So I like that interpretation that this is a night where like we are all on that level. We are all together. We are all the same, and we are all asking for forgiveness and kindness and all of these things from God, because it's an equalizing in a religion that can often be very like hierarchical or about who did most right this year.
Yeah, 100%. I think the idea that we don't know where the Unetanneh Tokef really came from, and yet one might argue the biggest part of our High Holy Day services is, I think that speaks to the power of like oral tradition and storytelling within any religion, but especially within Judaism, and the fact that we pass things down, and that means that sometimes we don't know where they came from, but that doesn't necessarily make them less valid or less important, because here we have one of the most important parts of our service and we don't really know its origin. We're just this is really important and it's been a part of it, so it's going to stay a part of it. And I think oftentimes we can discount oral tradition and storytelling as a way of passing knowledge down, when for diasporic or historically oppressed peoples, that is the only way to maintain history and culture. That's how Jews have been able to survive. That's how so many people and groups and cultures who have survived diaspora and oppression have been able to continue is by holding on to oral tradition and passing things down that way.
Yeah.
And I think that, also speaks to this thing we're talking about around Jews who were previously forced into conversion being Jewish still, and so many of the ways that many Jews who were forced into conversion held on to their culture was like only oral. It couldn't be written down. It couldn't be observed in public, but maybe you could talk about it in private. Maybe you could recite prayers, in your own head, in your own, to yourself. And that is how Judaism was allowed to stay alive for people, whereas otherwise they would have not been able to survive and be Jewish. So I think that makes the Unetanneh Tokef way cooler to me.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that Kol Nidre is this time of unity. And I do think we could maybe use more time of unity within our Jewish spaces.
Yes. Another element of Kol Nidre that I think is just important to note before we begin to wrap up is that it is a time when Jews are expected to give up any agreements or obligations that they have committed to during the past year, and in an attempt to recognize the importance of the commitment to God and the relationship with God, that you give up any kind of false promises or false commitments made in the past year. And this has historically been an excuse for violence against Jews and anti-Semitism, because it is based on the belief that Christians could not trust Jews, that they were just going to absolve themselves of any commitments they've made on Yom Kippur. Yeah. Then how could you ever really trust a Jew? And it's sad. There's all these explanations where people are like, no, it's not any commitment. It's just commitments that feel false or that weren't fulfilled or that you made without obligation or without knowing or that you made without thinking it through clearly. And it's these attempts to justify our tradition to anti-Semites that we still try to do to this day, I think. I was in a class about anti-Semitism and we were talking about the myth that Jews use babies' blood to make matzah.
Classic.
Yeah, an oldie.
A classic way to make matzah is with blood.
Just Christian babies need that blood. And there was a note in the textbook, it was like, which is completely wrong because the Torah forbids us from ingesting blood. And I was like, that's the only reason it's wrong. The fact that we don't murder people is also a big one.
That's so funny. They're like, it only couldn't be this way because not.
Murdering is fine. It's actually not. It's one of the 10 commandments. But I find it hilarious that we are still trying to distill down our tradition into easily explainable components to people that hate us. Like, they will find reasons to hate us, whether it is about Kol Nidre or it's about Jesus Christ or about whatever these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories come from. I just want to say that this tradition of trying to resist anti-Semitism by making Kol Nidre a night where those who have converted can come home to synagogue, as one explanation of the holiday is, or whether it's just a night for feeling more connected to God despite living in a very anti-Semitic society, or any of these interpretations. Like, we should be able to celebrate and honor our relationship to Judaism without trying to explain it to people who are determined to hate us. And I just want to relieve anybody of that obligation if you're constantly facing anti-Semitic social pressures or conspiracy theories. Like, we don't have to explain ourselves all the time.
Period.
What are some final thoughts that you have, Alana, thinking back on this conversation and Yom Kippur generally?
Overall, the more that I come back to Jewish holidays and get to learn about them in a more wholehearted way, when I've chosen Judaism, they feel so much more meaningful to me. And being able to learn these little tidbits that I wouldn't know about otherwise, like the idea that it's this dress rehearsal for death, the whole concept of the Unetanneh Tokef, and even just the reason why we have, why we fast or why we are supposed to wear white and all that stuff, just makes you be like, oh, that makes me more interested. I love that I get to just learn about it for myself again. And that's the whole point of making benches, really. I also just think this idea that Yom Kippur and the high holy days in general, the days of awe, is all about recognizing that we all have both light and dark inside of us, and embracing that is really powerful, because I don't think that the point of Yom Kippur or entire High Holy Days is to get all the dark parts out and just embrace the light or just be the light. The idea is to recognize that we all have both, and we will always have both. There will always be things we are like not proud of, that are not our best self. And that is what makes us human. And what matters is what we choose to do with that. And I think it is powerful to be like, yeah, there are things that I did that I'm not proud of. And also there are things that harmed me. And I am a person who can harm and be harmed, and I deserve to forgive and be forgiven, or let go if I am not ready to forgive or be forgiven. And I think there's just something very powerful about that Judaism and general capitalist society that we live in really tries to stamp out. I think the whole idea is that we need to be like, quote unquote, good and perfect and our best self all the time, and any mistake that we make or any time that we fall short is a personal and moral failing. But I think the High Holy Days in general is just really pushing us away from that and reminding us of our humanity, and that it's okay to hold both of those truths. That is my final Yom Kippur reflection, and I'm very excited to honor Yom Kippur this year.
As usual, I'm just like lost in your thinking of just thinking about the light and the darkness and the embracing of who we are and being able to be forgiven for the harm that we've caused. Because as many Jewish sources have noted, it's harder to forgive ourselves than it is to forgive others.
And that is the truth.
Which makes me think of Tashlich. And part of Tashlich is you letting go of your own sins or transgressions. Even if other people have forgiven you, how do you let that go so it doesn't weigh you down? And I just want to say, I'm going to say my thing about it because I'm thinking about it now. Rabbi Alan Liu talks a lot about baseball and how baseball season is also high holiday season, and it's funny. And I was thinking about how horror movie season is also high holiday season, and I love horror movies and see them often, but especially during this time of year. And thinking about those themes of light and darkness and like embracing all parts of ourselves, because when people look at me and they're like, oh, why would you want to watch such horrible things? Or why would you want to spend time talking about zombies? And I'm like, because somebody else thought of it. Like somebody else is struggling with it so much they made a movie about it. And we are all collectively thinking about Jewish community, thinking about death. We're thinking about these scary things all the time. And rather than pretend we're not thinking about it, let's go to Kol Nidre. Let's go to Yom Kippur morning and hear about it. Or let's go watch a scary movie and confront it. So I think, definitely embracing the darker things that we don't want to see about ourselves is something that I think is really cool.
That's our Yom Kippur episode. We hope y'all, if you're fasting, have a great fast. If not, incredible. I hope you eat something delicious. And I hope your high holidays have been everything you would want them to be. And nothing less and nothing more. Maybe more. I don't know. And we will be back in a few weeks' time, a week, 2 weeks, for an episode on Sukkot, because there's so many freaking holidays in the month of Tishrei, with the incredible Sol Weiss. Sol is a visual artist, ritualist, educator, and has used cultural organizing to explore how land, kinship, and Jewish tradition can support us in overcoming oppression, healing from colonization, and building new worlds. Literally the perfect person to talk to for Sukkot, and we can't wait for y'all to listen to that when it comes out. Bye. Bye.